Hi, everyone. So, hi, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the State of Philippine Design. My name is Car, and I'm really happy to be here today. I was also previously from the Design Center, and I actually, that's why they're reacting that way. And I worked specifically on Design Week. And the year that I led Design Week was the first time we did the State of Philippine Design. So I'm very happy to be here today and to have this talk continuing for the third straight year. So yeah, today's mix of speakers is super interesting. So I was talking to Ray and preparing for this talk. Ray, who is leading this year's Design Week and is also doing the voiceovers, he told me about the intentions behind the curation of today's panel. And he told me that they really wanted to look for people who transcended traditional design boundaries and traditional design disciplines. So I think this would be a very interesting panel to kind of assess the year that was in Philippine design. Yeah, so it will be super interesting. So thank you again to Miss Cora for being here, to Paula, Natasha, and Rambi for being here, and I'm super excited to get started. Okay, so to kind of just round out the foundations of our discussion, and because this is such a multidisciplinary panel, I wanted to let these fluid boundaries kind of shape our discussion today. So I wanted to ask first, how would you define design? Which I think is maybe a big question, but because we are coming from different disciplines here and kind of crossing different boundaries, maybe we set the groundwork for what we'll be talking about today. So perhaps, Ms. Karen first?
Well, a design is a plan. But if it is a plan, you are reacting to something or responding to maybe a situation, an environment, a need. Maybe a need that you would like to address. And then you make the nuts and bolts, you make the lines, you make the surfaces of that, but with a consciousness about the entire ecosystem of what you're going to build it in. That is very important in design, I think, the sensitivity. And of course, all of you will agree with me, it is the thought, the thinking process that goes behind the development of that design that can make it successful, responsive, and responsible to the people who will use and from who will derive ideas for that design. As an anthropologist, of course, I have sensitivity about the rights of the tubo and the integrity of our designs, not only the designs as manifest in the material culture, but also the design of the structure of the community and the culture. I think so. It's an entire thing. It's not just thinking of something to draw, to make, to craft, but an entire ecosystem itself. And I think design has to have a responsible ecosystem.
Thank you so much, Ms. Cora. So if I'm hearing this correctly, design really kind of, I'm going to use the word again, but it transcends the disciplines that we usually think about when we use the word design. So it's beyond, let's say,
it's really beyond that thing. It has many layers of complex knowledge and awareness and traditions that have built up to maybe that idea that with which you would respond. So it is really beyond, and you examine, as I said, not only the material culture, but the immaterial culture of the people that, Islandness, if you're going to do that. And of course, I think you have extremely extraordinary brain that you can, I don't know if anybody has done it, perhaps you're not going to snatch it from, thin air. But at the moment, for us mortals, I think that kind of sensitivity to the ecosystem and to the tangible and intangible cultures of all our cultures, diverse. We all have different cultures. The Philippines, we are blessed with diversity of cultures, but at the same time, we have binding commonalities, which should also be recognized.
I really also found it interesting how you said that design also has all of these layers of knowledge and layers of ideas that includes us. That we, as we were discussing earlier, that we are as katutubo as anybody else.
We are all katutubo.
So I also wanted to use that kind of as a transition to Sir Paolo, to just that idea of being katutubo to wherever we're from, and that our islandness might be rooted in wherever we're from, and whether that is Manila, let's say, or any of our urban cities, or more contemporary quote-unquote cities. So I would say that in transitioning to your space, how would you define design?
Thanks for that. It was actually still preparing the first question. Being a non-designer in the room and a little bit of a nerd in this space. So I'm not a designer. So I'm primarily a marketing person and also an advocate for creative economy. But definitely one thing that I see as a common thread, because in the National Design Policy, it's very clear there are 4 domains of design. The 4 domains are image making, which is the largest for at least the survey that was done, 35%. And then there is object making, place making, and then experience making. Underlying the thread to all of that is design as a higher order cognitive exercise or cognitive capacity, where some people call it design thinking, but essentially it is a conceptualization of the world not as it is, but what it could be. And then putting that in some form, planning that, structuring that, testing that, and then implementing and defining as you go along. So there is always an objective to change the world around us. I think that is the key element of the impact of design. Typically, when you say, oh, I want to be a designer, there are 2 things that people understand. One is, oh, gusto mo mag-drawing, or gusto mo maging fashionista. But I think that is really just a more visible expressions of design. That's why they're more immediate. But I do think when you really embrace design and what it is, it's a higher order cognitive thinking skill. I wouldn't even say it's natural, it has to be owned. And then in owning that, it's really the ability to imagine, reshape, and recreate the world around us.
Wow. I do think that's one of the most beautiful definitions of design that I've also come across in other places as well. That it's literally the activity to bring things that do not yet exist. And if we keep imagining worlds that are better and we keep designing towards that, then maybe we'll have a better country and a better world. Which brings me to Tasha. So Tasha, actually, I've interviewed her for my thesis, and I've asked her the same exact question. So I wonder if that's changed, but yeah, go ahead. What is design for you?
I think for me, what I've seen is design is what allows us to see if something or someone is alive, because it is the act really of not just survival, but also seeing how we can thrive in an environment, and not just as human beings, but even our plants and animals and everything we find in our environment. What makes something breathe, or what makes that possible really is design. And I've really seen that come to life in a lot of the work that I do. Not just seeing how nature itself is the ultimate source, I think, for Filipino design really, but also really seeing how even when we work with our local communities and we understand their closeness to nature, we really see how design is embedded in that. And defining, for example, we have this term biomimicry, or this idea of copying design from nature. I really feel like that in itself doesn't even have to be defined by a term, because almost everything we do create, even for example in hospitals and things that make people better, it all goes back to the idea of how we were able to survive in nature, in our environment around us. So our reactions by creating these designs is allowing us to thrive in harsh environments, in areas that we are unsure of. Design makes us feel comfortable. It makes us feel that there's room for a better world. And I definitely have also seen that really in our youth, and how we're really able to unpack all these different social and environmental challenges that are thrown at us as younger generations, and how we're really able to face that, whether it be being very unserious about it, by really seeing now how a lot of social media has been shifted to a perspective that feels more relatable, more vulnerable, more genuine. It's that in itself is design. It's a reaction to be able to adapt to the environment around us and how to be a part of it rather than against it. And so when we have things like colonialism or ideas that were brought about to separate us from nature or the environment we're from, these are not exactly good designs. It's because in the end we end up destroying the very things that should be making up our foundations for design. So when we talk about the theme Unearthing Islandness, it's this idea of really connecting us back to what good design is, and that being good is being good to nature, being good to everything that we find around us that keeps us living. So that's our water, our maritime consciousness, understanding also the way even our plants can survive on their own, make their own food. So how can we do that as well as humans? How can we support that cause rather than fight against it? So in being, human in this world, I think design is an essential process to be able to unpack the different intricacies of the ecosystems around us, and how are we able to be a part of it and really understand that we as well are our nature, we are our islands.
Wow, like this is the first question, and all the answers are so complex. Well, the question was also complex, because I guess design is also very complex. Like I think that's kind of the double-edged sword of design, and it's being everything and nothing and everywhere and nowhere. And it's about life, and it's about expressing and staying alive. But I guess like that's how it's so difficult also to understand design and to force to contain it when it's just about being alive. So thank you for that, Tasha. And now, Rambi, what about you in your experiences with Indigenous people and artisans as well? How do you think design is defined?
I always like this idea that I said, that I read before, that a designer is a problem solver. So I view design as like the artist who designs is solving a problem based on their environment. So my work is mostly like, I'm not a designer, I'm more of a merchandiser. So I support designers by helping them look at their environment, their problems, their highs and their lows, to be able to push forward a better product. No? So I see myself someone like a sidekick, to the designers. So the designers are like the superheroes. So I view weavers, crafters, carvers as the designer, and my work is really helping them create a better design or a better product to help solve the problem, I guess.
Yeah.
Simpler, but I don't know.
It's interesting because it's been brought up twice on this panel already. I'm not a designer. But if design is everything and everywhere and it's life, is everyone a designer also who gets to be a designer and who gets to call themselves a designer if it's all around us? Who would like to begin?
Yeah. You like.
I think we, in some way, we are all designers. Filipinos are very adept at what you call discarte. Somebody discussed that in a previous roundtable, which was run by Ryan Rosas, no? That all of us know that discarte. So all of us are designers in a way in trying to solve something and being able to cope up with things that are from unique design, so that you can move efficiently. Hindi kalat-kalat, and then magaling yung Pinoy. So, if we are all able to make this content and creatively, responsibly, then that makes us designers, not only of material things, but I think you also design the way you run your life. And you said problem solver. I was talking to Frey Kapadi, the book designer, and he says that is, this is venturing into another field, but what he says is the problem with some book designers. They show their whatever, their personality, but actually, you have the salvavida, you have the reader, read the text better. So I think it's all of that. We are all designers because we don't want to make ourselves miserable, we want to make ourselves better. So a recognition of the ecosystem, a sensitivity to the culture that you're working with, including your own, your family, then we are all designers in that manner.
This was the hottest debate last August 16 when we were doing the workshop for the National Design Policy. So the members of the Design Advisory Council were there, plus current and previous Design Advisory Council, as well as design industry stakeholders, of course, Design Center TV. It was a really hot debate because I had a little map in terms of the impact and who should the design policy impact. And I put there, very simple designers. He said, well, aren't we all designers, And then the room was literally split. On the one hand is that everybody has the capacity to design, problem solve, etc. But at the same time, design is a skill. And in that skill, there is good design and there's bad design. And it was actually the more well-known designers in the room who were saying not everybody can be a designer. People can try, but but there's a point where you have to respect that there is such a thing as design excellence, and that is honed over time. It takes practice. Like everyone has a capacity to sing, but there are people who sing badly. There are people who sing well. Everyone has a capacity to dance, and people dance badly. There are people who are excellent at it. And design, I would say, is the same. There is the innate capacity, human capacity to problem solve, but there are some people who will solve the problem more elegantly, more efficiently, and better than anyone else. And that takes honing. That takes time. Yes.
It's nothing to hold.
Yes.
Be a problem. But I think the dichotomy here, not dichotomy, but also the issue here would be designing something probably that is intangible, as I said, social skills, etc., as opposed to where you really need a design would be the application. When you're designing a building, it's going to crash if you don't have any skill, and other things that may deteriorate or disintegrate on you. But I think on the other side, just on the other side, of course, there are people who are better at living than,
Yes.
even without holding. I mean, they just have this instinct. And as I said, that skill should be inherent also, and truly developed and nurtured by several layers of people around you and the institutions, I think.
May I just add one more thing? Sorry. Sorry. The old people.
We have that.
It struck me from the earlier question, and then this one also. Who is the designer? It's just an image metaphor that I have because I'm looking at those circles over there. Design is really quite interesting in the sense that imagine three friends. Two friends are always the opposite when they fight, and there's the one who is the best friend in the middle, who actually blends the group. The two friends who are sort of opposite each other are art and innovation. Art is expression, etc. No, innovation is tech and whatever. And then you have design in the middle, who's actually friends with both. And there's this dynamic of design that really makes it very flexible, and I think that's a precious part. Not only the definition of what is design, but who is a designer. And that ability to bridge both innovation and art, that's extremely rare.
With a view to the future.
Yes.
I mean, always. It's not just the present. To look into the future with that sort of thing is not just in the present, because in the long run, what will be the impact, what will be the effect, and how we will influence the next designers and thinkers and people around.
But these are good designers. Those who are able to think of. Maybe we can't assume that everybody thinks that way. for the designers who think long term, maybe that's not something that I think maybe this panel, in your experience, it may be something that you do quite naturally. But I wonder if it's something that all designers do. But anyway, okay.
Or perhaps they have too.
Yeah.
They think that something has been so functional and usable. For instance, the designer of the Font Helvetica, would he have imagined it to be used for exiting toilets, etc.? I don't know. But I think he had that vision that I want
Foresight. Yes.
foresight. That I want this used by many people, everybody, and for all sorts of things. For marriage contracts and sewage covers.
So in terms of like who is a designer, I think there's a dedication and practice needed to be a designer, to be able to have that foresight, to see beyond what you're creating. And so you have to focus. I would consider myself like a jack of all trades, or Jacqueline of all trades. And my work is to support designers like weavers, give them the understanding beyond what they see, like how their end client will use it and stuff like that. Why, how they want to feel, make that person feel. So they are designers because they're creating. I am a merchandiser or support because I'm giving them what they need. So in a way, I'm helping solve the problem, but I'm not the problem solver. So that's why I don't consider myself a designer.
Wow, what an interesting reframing of things. Sasha, do you have anything to add to this?
I find it very interesting. I think it brings up the idea that there are different kinds of designers, and we don't need to kind of box design into like one type of designer, but there are different types of things that also are reactions towards designs. And what I also find interesting also is like when you talk to people nowadays, like because of this liberation of graphic design with Canva and all these different applications online, now everyone quote unquote can be like a graphic designer. But then it also goes back to, is it good graphic design? Can people actually relate to it? And is it something that actually has meaning? So I think this is a conversation we had a while ago where there needs to be that theory or the thought behind the design. We can't just be creating things because it looks pretty, but we also have to be able to explain and understand why this exists. And I think that's what makes someone a good designer, is you're able to create a grounding or foundation for the reason why you're creating, and not just for the sake of it. And that also creates a difference between design and art, because in the Western world, they really view art as art for art's sake. But when you come here to the Philippines and you see what Filipino art is, there's a reason behind every single production, every single reason why they weave this way, why they craft this way. And so when we talk about like the traditional arts, I feel like this idea of art for art's sake is a very like Western concept. Like here in the Philippines, everything has a reason and a meaning why they really, create these types of basket weavings, why we have these textiles. It isn't just because they felt like it, but there's this higher spiritual consciousness that allowed them to create for the universe, for something deeper. And which is why the Filipinos are so good at creating also minuscule things, why we're also really, mas really understanding why these things happen, and young people nowadays love to question, why are we doing this? Why have previous generations left the earth like this? There are a lot of different, aspects now that make someone a designer, investigating. But also, again, going back to the idea of good design, it has to have meaning and be grounded in something deeper, other than just, I just made it out of nowhere. And I think that's what creates the difference between like a designer and like what this is.
You brought in art. I find that all of these things were not made as art. The bulul was not an artistic sculpture. The tinalak was for something else. The mind is for something. So, in effect, the design is derived from very special material culture. Among the Bagobo, for instance, a son who declaims well or is able to recite parts of their oral history is given a shirt, a fully embroidered one. It's not an art piece. is something, a sign of affection. And of course, when you grow older, it's a sign of status, you know. And that's what I was advocating earlier during our conversation, really. That design has to have a deeper background, you know. You need to know, first of all, the culture. Very important. And I was telling them that how I designed a certain project. There was an international conference for installation art on the beach in Unearthing. There were 10 international installation artists, and we made them live with the barangay so that they would imbibe and learn and eventually draw out something. How would they design that experience and manifest as an installation with bamboo on the beach? Something like that.
So I think there are two kind of threads of thought going through our current discussion. So there's one thread about there are certain people who dedicate their time, maybe their life, to honing this skill that everyone supposedly has. But then there's also the other side where it's not even called design. It's not even called art, but they are designers.
Well, in a way, because they have formed the idea and the reaction to the situation, like living better and then being able to address it. But, for instance, the barbero is also the maker of the bangka. The one who dies is also the healer, because he or she's the one who knows the botanical species that you need to cure and you need to cure a headache with, so that they don't consider themselves artists. Like I think I told you that one of the weavers, she was a gamaba, and she had a piece, and so people wanted to acquire. So she was asked, "How come you don't make too much of this?" And she says, "I'm a farmer. Well, that's what I do. I make skirts for my family, not to sell." So that's the other thing. But of course now it has changed. Although I think the Ifugao were into the quote-unquote tourist arts early on, because even during the turn of the 19th century, they were making spoons, not to be used, but to sold to museums. So, design, art, craft, handicraft, you know, many things, but they all need design in the lifetime or in the cycle of whatever it is that you manufacture.
This conversation brings me back to when I go and assess a community and area. And sometimes you go into like a town where there's no clear-cut crafts that they're making. But then if you go into the farms, you see one of the most common baskets that are made throughout the Philippines is yung limliman, which is where the chickens lay their eggs. And usually, an area's limliman comes from one farmer who decided to make a basket out of, let's say, the palapa of the nyog, from the forest of the coconut tree. He creates wine and it works, and his neighbors see that. And instead of creating it themselves, they say, "Oh, can you make for me?" And then that kind of goes on, and then biglang he's a basket maker and a farmer. But in the end, he's also a designer. So being, I guess now it's important to be named a designer, because we all need we all need our hats. Design is in us all. But to be called a designer, I think you have to be in practice to be called a designer.
Anybody else? Any thoughts? So I do agree that maybe design, at least today, at least in this conversation, may be a practical label, and we can look at it that way. So now with this understanding, how do you think our islandness connects to this amorphous concept of design? I guess hand in hand with that is, what do you think islandness is? Who would like to begin?
The youngest person.
So, okay, like how we actually kind of came up with this idea of unearthing islandness is because we really felt like we needed connection back to the water. A lot of people, especially the young people and kids that we visit in different communities, a lot of them still have this fear of the water, the fear of kind of like not knowing what's under it, but also not knowing how to swim. I find this so weird that we come from a country that we were just talking about has one of the longest coastlines in the world. Fifth longest. So it's just a very odd disconnect. And when I started kind of understanding why this disconnect happened, of course it draws back to the idea of like colonialism, or this idea that people told us, we're people of the land, you have to learn how to plant rice, feed the colonies. Like it's this concept that we still have to break out of and have to learn how to break out of. So unearthing islandness is this idea where we connect ourselves back to the water and learn how to follow it and understand that even when we design, we should be designing with the water in mind. Which is why, for example, like when we look at our cities, it's so odd that we don't take into account our waterways. Why wasn't this the very first kind of body or very first part of the ecosystem we looked at? Because water is a source of life and what flows throughout all of us. So when we came up with the idea of unearthing islandness, it was kind of taking us back to that maritime consciousness that we really once had, coming from the Austronesians. So these are our forebears, our ancestors, who really were the first ones who learned how to sail our oceans and who utilized this maritime consciousness, or this idea of being able to read the stars and the water at the same time, as the way to navigate, the world. So why are we so afraid of the water, and why have we created this very big gap between the water and the way we design? So that's kind of the reason why we wanted to talk about islandness, and how can we also again connect back to the idea of being an archipelago, not seeing water as, a lot of people are talking about this now, how water really wasn't a division, but it really was the connection. And when you look at our languages, for example, why around Southeast Asia we can even understand each other. There's so many similar words in our vocabulary, and language itself is the reason why we are all kind of connected. But then, for example, you go to Europe and you see Spain and France so close to each other, but because land divides them, very different languages, very different culture. So in the end, water really does become a source of connection. It becomes a source of co-creation. And being an archipelago, we need to be able to design around this idea and have that consciousness to be able to think about the water being one of the first things we look at, and also being one of the first things that we ourselves embody, being fluid, being understanding, malasakit or ginhawa. A lot of our terms like kapwa come from this idea of being able to put yourself in the shoes of another, or being able to understand that we are an archipelago. So even if we are quote-unquote separate islands, we are all united by the water.
Yeah, that's true, but has anybody read Benedict Anderson? And of course we are islands, and indeed the water connects, but also separates. And I remember all the fights that they used to have. But I think that the cohesive part of the water will be really connect, because even languages cross because of the Austronesian family that came for the first time. But islandness, therefore, should be seen with discerning eyes, because we're very regionalistic, and that kind of regionalism has been fostered by our colonials. The Spanish would make us fight one another, and the Americans were not any better. So that when we look at the islandness, it is an acknowledgement of our diversity. We are related, but there is diversity. Maybe the most related will be the non-islands, because they're all together. Even in the Cordilleras, there are differences. For me to get the essence of islandness is to study the culture of each one, and then also the relationship, the connectedness, how it is that how is it that we are actually connected. I suppose I can talk about material culture, where it shows, but also about attitudes, and a lot of it in linguistics indeed, because we just came from one family. You know, of course, that the Austronesians were a group of Austronesian-speaking people, right? Not Austronesians, but Austronesian-speaking peoples. It was just one group from the coast of South China, and they were indigenous. They're not Han, they're not white Chinese, they're like us. They're brown, and they came down not immediately to the Philippines. They came down to Taiwan. So there is that. That's why a lot of archaeological connection between Taiwan and Itbayat in Batanes.
Also the Puyunon, no?
But mostly, the first landing is Itbayat, okay, in Batanes. And so downwards, no? So the language separates at certain times. I studied Pampango in Bicol, and it separated about 2,000 years ago, I think, but they were related. And so language, because the way we call our designs, if I may use that, the designs, and our material culture, would be different from island to island, perhaps. And the environment also provides this differences, this diversity, because of the organic things that are present. For instance, nowhere else in the Philippines does buyaboy. Nowhere else in the Philippines does buyaboy grow. It's mostly in Santa. And this land of the Philippines, Loralai. It's so hard to say. In the Philippines, they don't grow as much. And so the making of the headgear is concentrated in Batanes. So these are different impulses from the islands, and that is what we should look into, but more especially also how they deal with climate change, the environment, and of course how they deal with the onslaught of globalization, so that we do not become homogeneous. And that's difficult to stem because of social media. And so how do we keep ourselves apart and yet one? How do we deal with designing our lives so that we are able to maintain at least our material culture, ourselves, the way we live? Everybody asks in anthropologists, what is culture? Is it straight dancing? No, culture is the way of life, the way we live every day, because culture is not stagnant. It changes. It's not a dead thing.
So on the question of islandness, and perhaps what a sort of preview, but still to be confirmed and budget to be agreed behind it, but one of the bolder suggestions that we have, recommendations, in fact, it's a strong recommendation in the National Design Policy, is the creation of a Center of Excellence for Tropical Design, Sustainability, Resiliency, Materials Research, and Creativity. The concept behind it is that we are number one is the most disaster-prone, one of the most disaster-prone countries in the world, not only because of typhoons, but volcanoes, earthquakes, you name it. Natural disasters, anyway. Man-made disasters, focus. So to get back to the point. The point is, problems are the lifeblood of designers. So when you have some of the biggest problems in the world, that should be the impetus of attracting the best design minds to solve it. Not only from a modern technological point of view, but from an indigenous wisdom point of view. That's the vision that we're painting for this tropical design research center. It's not so much an R&D center of fundamental materials only, but it's supposed to be the solution center. How do we solve for these problems? And the bigger vision of it also is that it's an international center. So imagine it like, in the glory days of Erie, which created really these fantastic new varieties of rice that was implemented the world over, except here. Yes. But the main point of that is we make it a center that attracts not only the best Philippine minds, but the best minds in the world to come to the Philippines and to help solve the problems of sustainability, resiliency, material sustainability as well. Incubate it here and then spread to the world. So that's one of our bolder ideas, embracing our own islandness to create new solutions for our world. Not yet. Practical lang po. For approval of the design. Well, in principle, we already have the alignment of the Design Advisory Council, but now it has to go to the round of the executive approval and then budgeting and implementation.
Sana soon.
It's a 5-year plan. It's not sana. It's within 5 years.
Actually, I'd really like to react to that when you mentioned about the School for Tropical Knowledge, because it actually exists already. What we've been doing at Kids for Kids since the start of the pandemic, we started this movement called Kapuluan ng Kabataan, and we really realized that the wisdom of Filipino culture is what allows us to actually solve the climate crisis. And we were doing a lot of typhoon relief, and then we realized we were friends with people from all 17 regions. So how are we now able to look at how Filipino culture, different ways of life that are living ways, stuff that aren't in like books, how are we able to kind of unearth that as design solutions for the climate crisis? So over the last year, me and my friends visited 17 regions of the Philippines and looking in particular how culture is a climate solution. And not needing to really have this complex of, the savior complex, we need to save the earth, but more we need to remember it. What are the things that we need to recall that we've forgotten throughout years of colonialism being introduced? And we started working with a lot of different remote island communities. So we started schools of culture and creativity. And what we wanted to do is to hone this tropical island knowledge, this idea of not exoticizing it as something very different and unique, but also highlighting the biodiversity and respecting their unique cultures at the same time, and creating these spaces where young people can talk about creating their own climate solutions. How can they learn from whatever is around them, and how can they also now be supported? So we first started it in Halian Island. Halian Island was ravaged by Typhoon Odette, completely covered in waves. And the news was that the island community passed away. So the mayor and the priest was going to come to the island to do mass burial, but they arrived and everyone survived. And so it was this really interesting, how were they able to survive? What were the different aspects? And one of them really came to mind, and it was really the idea for them that the reefs were the one that saved them. And they really needed to protect the reefs in order to protect their island. And then now, the island community has started kind of using that very, very painful story to now highlight what were the different solutions that already existed and how can even we come in and support those solutions. So we started the School of Culture and Creativity in Halian about 4 years ago. And now they've really made this solution their own. And the whole goal, again, of even like NGOs is to visit these communities, not to interfere with their ways of life, but support it. And not, again, come as like saviors who are going to help you, because a lot of these communities are actually thriving on their own. They have so much knowledge already to share, and it's up to us to actually learn from that, coming from a city or a place that is kind of like the epitome of this Western globalized world that we have to stop wishing for. So they now have their own turtle conservation program. They are now teaching kids again how to navigate the waters, how to identify different coral reefs, what are the ones that can be replanted, which are the ones that can't. A lot of the kids now do coastal cleanups on their own. And a lot of these kids are just already starting their own initiatives without even, having to kind of like ask permission from their parents, because they realize this is something they could start doing even at a very early age. So at the very beginning, without even having, for example, to be in traditional school, you're already honing a lot of life skills just by giving young people the platform to really see that they themselves can be a part of this larger ecosystem. So we started doing this program in 5 island communities already, and together with our partners in the different regions that we work with, we really want to create more spaces for these schools of local knowledge that really act as direct, solutions to the climate crisis. And how can we actually empower young people to champion these? Because in the end, we really need to make this an intergenerational conversation. Because the reason why the climate crisis existed is because the conversations were happening in the Western highfalutin tables never reached young people realizing that we'd have to inherit all of this. So it's a really good idea that this school will be, it's hopefully intergenerational. We can really invite more people to the table and have a lot of these already local solutions within these communities. And how can we also now support that call for decolonization, support for welcoming back in our archipelagic consciousness?
We just like to react to one of the problems was resilience. I think that's probably one of our flaws or problems at the moment, because we are too resilient. I mean, you see people waving anything in the back, so that we are able to be, we are resilient, we overcome. Somebody in the Senate said, if only you can stop laughing, I think we can solve some things. And then the other thing would be sustainability, and scaling up. Her program can not be scaled up. And again, sustainability, because, has there ever been an audit of all the projects, multi-million projects that were implemented and failed? And why was the failure? We have all of these programs in the mundo, trying to feed people, trying to reforest. Well, I was the monitor of the rice terraces, and it was difficult monitoring it. What has happened? Ifugao is still a 5th-class community. The Ifugao are still poor. There's still not enough people in schools. What is there a mechanism to audit the failures, and why? 10 years ago, we ran a conference at the National Museum, all the curatorial projects that failed and why. And just exhibits, etc. Has there been a program looking at all these UNESCO-funded, World Bank funded initiative for all sorts of disasters and problems in the Philippines, and why did they fail? I think that's very important to do an audit, so you learn from the mistakes of that. And again, as I said, can that be scaled up? What do you think? The schools?
Baka scaled out,
Yeah.
rather than scaled up. I think the thing with the Philippines is that we're so far apart, but though the water does bring us all together, I think that even in our crafts, let's just say in our textiles, there's textiles all over the Philippines. There's probably about 35 traditional weaving communities around the Philippines per area, but all the weaving is different. It's different. You have down south in Sulu, you have tapestry weave, which is the shabit. Then you go all the way up to Ifugao, and then you have the Binagbonan, which is the ikat, which is similar though to the Timolis Kinala, but still so different. I think what makes us have that islandness is also our adaptability. We have so many migrant fishermen who moved around the Philippines in this last century. Palawan itself, the Lido itself, there are no more really natives in the Lido. There's no IPs in the municipality of Lido that has 16 barangays. It has East Barangay is migrant fishermen from Masbate, a group of fishermen from Panay, Iloilo. You have places called Bilibahay and stuff like that. But they also consider themselves El Nido, taga-El but it's the way they moved there, they adapted, they made it their own, and they're finding ways to continue living there with their children, with their families, and creating and designing this life for them out there. But still, they still consider themselves from El Nido, also from where their parents were. At the same time, they're also Filipino. So I guess that's really the thing about the Philippines, this islandness of ours is we're so many different things, but at the same time, we're us. And the thing is, we're also finding solutions for our future and for the children's future.
Yeah, on that point of scale up, scale out, I really like the initiative that you're doing. So what's the term again of something of kapuluan?
Kapuluan ng kabataan.
Kapuluan ng kabataan. So one of the things, just to distinguish the idea of the Center of Excellence for Tropical Design, it's not so much a school, it's more of a research institute, research and innovation institute. But in theme number 5, action number 10 of the policy, theme number 5 is embed design as a national mindset, skill set, and art set. So that is the one that really democratizes the whole mindset and the problem solving capacity of design. It happens on 2 levels. One is upper education, whether it's at collegiate level or technical level. But the most challenging one will be K-12, and finding the right program for that. Because the program does exist. It's called the Art and Design track in the program. The issue with it is that it's not design. And also there's no real curriculum for what design should be. And I think it would be interesting to really embed the indigenous, the historical, the heritage quality of design we need to remember rather than reinvent or just import something that's not.
Me first. But isn't that not in the K-12 program? Because I know you said Cañales and the other one.
The program is there.
You crafted it. So
But in the implementation, I mean, when you get it on the ground, sorry, I'm maybe overspeaking.
no, go ahead.
It tends to go towards art. And with all due respect to art, but it is really a very, let's say, shallow also interpretation of what art is. It's not design. Or when it's design, it's drawing. It is not what we're talking about in terms of design as problem solving, design as really a solution building to making things better, or to creating a better life. It becomes more practical arts, type of thing. So,
Last response
Yes,
to this
last.
question, and then we'll move on to the next one.
So parang when you're saying it's K-12, you're putting it into the education system. So my question, is that going to adapt to their own concept of art or design per area? Because NCCA with TESTA did develop a TESTA accreditation for weavers, wherein you bump up and then you get a certain pay grade if you go through this section. It's been successful, I think, in Aklan, because the initial people who worked on it were from Aklan, sila, Ilya and Caspi. But then when they tried to adapt it to different areas of the Philippines, then there became a problem. So like for example, in Sulu, one of the weavers that I'm working with was asked by the local tester if she's willing to be an instructor so they can have that in Sulu. She said no, because at one point she wasn't sure if she had, I guess, the credentials to be able to teach, or maybe the support of the community. Another one is that suddenly that area, Gimbalagasan, that's where the root of weaving in Sulu is from, considered it their own right. And by teaching people outside of their own community, they're already diluting that idea. So in a way, but this is like scaling to the K-12. And I think there has to be more conversation on a local level in terms of where it's going and why it's being done. I think that was Testa's mistake in Sulu. It's like they just came up to someone and said, "Oh, magturo ka." but what we really have to talk about is why it's important. I guess there's a lot of disconnect all the way down to the grassroots. And it's something that we should always think about.
So it seems like when we say to unearth our islandness, when it comes to design, it seems like it's unearthing and acknowledging our diversity and unity also as a people, and approaching it with this very nuanced acknowledgement that it's not a blanket acknowledgement, that maybe also design is about problem solving. It's the double-edged capacity of Filipinos to be madiscarte, to be resilient. So with all of that in mind, the main question for this discussion is actually, what happened to Philippine design in 2024? And how do you think design as problem solving, design as discarded, design as diverse, etc.? What do you think happened in design in 2024? And how would you kind of assess that?
Manifested how? In the market,
In how you would
markets,
define
the products that were produced, in what sort of context do you want that explained?
I guess this is why, sige, go
I have an
ahead.
example.
Yes.
So 2024, I applied for a Bill Open Grant. So the title of my project was the use of Philippine silk in Tausug shabit weaving. So what I was able to do is, so the Tausugs were weaving. They started weaving this textile, this tapestry weave, like way back. They're saying that it came from India. And then they used to get the threads that they would weave through the Gujarat trade. This trade with China, India, and stuff like that kind of stopped before the Second World War. There are tales that they used to weave in Piña before the war, bago ang guerra. But after the war, there was trade with China, and suddenly all the things that the Philippines was importing was something that had polyester. That's why majority of the weaves, the Philippine weaves you have, are made out of polyester threads because that is available in the market. So we wanted to find a solution for them to use Philippine silk. Philippine silk that has just started being producing in the Philippines, I guess in the 1980s and 1970s when the technology was brought in. Then we kept using, and then because the weave of the Tausug is a tapestry weave, you need it to be tight. So there's stretch, so you can't use the locally available cotton or silk because it will break, and they themselves won't want to use it. So Marian Marcos State University, the Sericulture Institute, and then also OISCA in Bago City, in Negros. So they were producing 60 denier silk, which is a thicker silk, which is stronger. So I said, oh, possible. So we were able to get a grant from Benil to get the silk, and then to bring the weavers from Sulu all the way here to Manila. Then we had another challenge, was that the Tausug weave in 20 different colors. So we got, but this 60 denier silk is not something everybody uses. So also nobody would do small quantities of dyeing. So we sent it to Palawan where they use and they dye silk. So we did our 12 colors. We brought it to Manila. We had them set up the loop start to finish. And initially, madulas and everything, but it looked okay. Then we started weaving in the dead of summer, in May, like right before the opening of the exhibition. And because of the heat, because of the silk, because of the dryness, suddenly they're weaving and started like breaking. But in a way, they were also able to weave about 4 inches of textiles, each had 2 weavers. And then we had to exhibit, and actually the pieces aren't closed yet. But one of the things that came out for me for that is we tried it, we looked at it. Maybe they said maybe if we have like twisted threads, it would work better, because we realized that you can't use just filament. You need something that's twisted so that makagat yung design. So they were able, as designers, to look at this and to look at solutions to create something. But in the end, it's sort of like a failure, because it's just like, oh, we can't always do this. Because it's not, they're not sanay, it doesn't help the weaving process. But at least we work through it to see maybe we have to do something else in the future, get some other threads. But I think in 2024, for me, it was also looking at the possibilities, working into it, and also for the weavers also coming out and saying, kaya pala namin to. Because before the program that we did prior to that, they didn't think that it was even possible for them to weave in silk. But through this process, they want to, and then now other people want to see how this experiment goes forward. So, kasi for me, one of the biggest problems of the Philippines is materials. It's really materials. Materials, how to process them, to use them, to have all these products. And I think this year for me was really about people being more open to all these challenges and Bill giving me, yeah, try it out. For me, in terms of design, that was my 2024.
So opening possibilities where perhaps it wasn't yet there.
But still, say, if you tell weavers like, oh, they're weaving in polyester, and then you give them another thread to use, like cotton or silk, their initial reaction is, no, we don't weave that. There is a fear in weavers, in crafters to do something new, but only because they also don't know what the outcome will be. So for me, the win with the two weavers from Sulu was also that they had the courage and the adventurousness to say yes to this project and to actually do it. So I think that really is the openness. In 2009, when the Philippine Textile first started, we were at the point where there was certain death for Philippine textiles, because there was like the weavers were in their 50s and 60s and even older. It had already skipped generations, and then now in 2024, we see younger and younger weavers and excellent at their crafts. So giving them the opportunity and the knowledge that they can actually do this, be a weaver, and not just weaver lang ako, weaver ako. So I think for me, I feel that now that it's 2024, I see a more openness in the artisans, in the artists, to explore and to be able to create. I think for the longest time, creation was to be able to create, to design something new was a little bit hard for them. But I think there is more ease in the market, and also they know who is willing to support them, that they're exploring, and I think that's always a good thing for me.
Oh, wow, thanks, Rami. That was so beautiful. Just kind of opening up this world with them. It's so nice to hear how that has developed in the last many years.
My design moment, non-designer, of 2024, which inspired a very specific part of the national design policy, is the MMDA PWD round. You see, remember that social media brouhaha of this PWD round created by, it's a different, I don't know if it's, yes, it's in Quezon City, I'm not sure if it's in Kamni. The one that it was so steep that you couldn't get a wheelchair up. Why is that important? It highlights that design is not considered in public works. That because the key principle of design is first of all empathy and user testing. Yeah. You have to think of the user and you have to test with the user. And obviously that wasn't done. So it's a critical part now of the theme number 4 of the National Design Policy. Priority number 4 is embed design in policy making. Through a policy lab and also through LGU-based Good Design for a Better Future program. Now, this is not a small thing. It's actually, you have examples of good to great design all over Metro Manila, but it's private sector. This one, BGC, etc. But we live in a city where sidewalks are a luxury of the rich communities, and it is not a default of the city by itself. That's a failure in public design. And it's not infrastructure, it's mindset, and priorities. So this is something that we need to change. Now, another thing that I'm linking this to, because if there's anything I'm really passionate about in the whole creative economy topic, it's creative cities. I was one of those who really pushed for the first one, for Baguio to apply and help advise also the group applying for Cebu at that time, of how did you do it, how did you get it. But I think for me, the most critical part, and I'll quote Charles Landry here, there's who wrote the book of Creative Cities. There's a thing about cities of culture. We know that. They speak about the past, the heritage, the historical nature of what made of the past that makes a city, defines it based on how it was before, the heritage that it preserves. But the creative city is a little bit different from that. It is it is the dynamic that makes the city create its future. And the critical component of that dynamic is it retains and attracts its creative class. Now, what really attracts a creative class largely is a broad concept of amenities. But simply put, it is a city designed so that it creates a level of comfort and inspiration for new ideas to thrive. Sorry, just to close off this point, one of the things is such a simple term, but I said, wow, that is very visionary. Singapore, which is one of the UNESCO's creative cities of design, in their national design policy, they had two stated ambitions. We want, on the one hand, it's related to tech and innovation. We want Singapore to be, a tech and innovation hub. But that's for the business side of it. And for the other side, we want Singapore to be the city of design vision of Singapore is to not only be a livable city, but a lovable city. A lovable city. Because if there's anything that you can really say that Metro Manila is a lovable city? Yeah, you would laugh, on that one. So I have part of my, I'm a migrant, not yet full-fledged Baguio citizen, but I'm a migrant to Baguio, and at least that's what it still has. The people of Baguio love Baguio. The people of Iloilo love Iloilo. And the people of Metro Manila love Metro Manila. And that's very telling. Anyway, so that's my point.
Metro Manila or just Manila? I was going to bring up a point also, not to maybe to add a little bit. The reason I think Manila or Metro Manila has become not lovable is the lack of implementation of regulations. Why don't we have sidewalks? Because the police, the barangay, allow people who own those small houses to build their laundry area. They fence off the banqueta. It is also the implementation of what they call the house HLRD or whatever. That is why it is. That is what has to be seen in the creation of a lovable city. I think we have the regulations. The laws are in place, and nothing but ask, but they are not implemented. And that is that a mindset? Mindset of who? The population? The authorities? How in heaven's name do you change that? How do you make the Filipino aware of the other, yung kapwa mo, hindi lang yung iyo? Because all of these are okay in a middle range or like society. Have you been to, you enter through San Fernando Street behind, you go in behind the Chinatown or all the, they defecate on the sidewalk, that's it. So how do we craft a reality about this? Is there a solution to it? We're overpopulated, we're poor, everybody's in Manila because that's where all the trabajo is, no? So that lang. Maybe in the crafting of this, the crafting of the design policies, something about linking up with the police or whoever about this matter. Because that's the reason we don't have, they have sporadic things, they chase the sidewalk vendors, then they're back after the police is gone or after they're like, sorry, but this is the reality. It's well and good in BGC or maybe Makati, but try walking through Sampaloc. Just try walking through Sampaloc.
It's very, very interesting because on the one hand we talk about design in 2020 for opening possibilities, and now it's opening questions.
Yeah,
but in a very specific area of public governance. So you see how design seeps into like the most. I really like the terminology mindset and heart set. So that's it speaks to the everywhereness of design.
But let me address the issue about what was designed for me this year.
Yes.
Okay. We are making a museum, a physical museum, so that is design. And we have, of course, considered parking, sanitation, and everything. So that's not really a big deal. There's an architect and supervising people. But I'm doing a book right now with the esteemed book designer Frank Bali. And our conversations about design really are, he says, I hit the word peg. It's like everybody, ito yung gusto ko, ito yung peg ko. Doesn't anybody think anymore? But I think that thinking goes back to what I was talking about, knowing your culture, knowing what you're presenting in that book, including knowledge that you don't throw the entire family of all the fonts into the book, and kasi maganda ito, there is absolutely no way of studying, because they're just there, nakakatalanta. And he had a very telling thing, it's because of the teachers. So let's go back to the teachers, no? They think in a certain way, the students learn to think in a certain way, and all their work look alike. Because they've been asked to, vet certain things. So he sees this and he's actually a little desperate. And he's 83 years old, but he's one of the sharpest. He's one of the designers when he made delivery for the design for the MRT. And he explained every letter and everything that he did. Why, the colors, the design behind it, every 20 meters or whatever, there's a sign on the station, that sort of thing. But he says, there's not too many people young ones, who think that way, and he thinks that it's about time we cultivate this sort of study. I was telling you that I invited someone from the Havana School of Photography to the National Museum some years back. I think Havana has the best photography school apart from New York. But from your first year, you don't hold the camera. You learn theory, philosophy, you learn theories about photography, image making, visual anthropology before you're allowed. Maybe some of our designers can go through a lot more theoretical things so that they learn to think and what to think about. Sorry.
No, yes, it's a totally valid opinion. And it's very interesting because I do think there's this hunger for learning more about our culture, which is more palpable today, I feel, than in previous years. So I hope that despite that observation, I hope we are headed towards this, what I feel could be a very ripe hunger for. Yes.
So I guess to answer the question about the 2024, I think there's a lot of healing that's happening. A lot of people forget we are quite a young quote-unquote nation. I don't really like that word, but there's so much history that we still have to unpack and unlearn. Because majority of the time I remember being in school, we're always just taught about our colonial eras. Like that's it. They talk about the wars, they talk about why we lost, they talk about all these sad, very defining moments in our history, but it's all about colonization. It's always about like the heaviness of our very painful history, which we have to acknowledge. But also there's so much that we aren't being taught in school about why we should be proud to be Filipino, what makes the Filipino great. How do we unpack that the Filipino itself was a term that was introduced by Spaniards, and how do we unpack that? You know, there's so much that we have to re-remember or unlearn. So the reason, I guess, why I've used the term healing, it's because there are a lot of also open wounds that we forget to acknowledge, especially when it comes to trying to submit to Western or colonial thinking, where there's a lot of neo-colonialism happening. I mean, we're living through a genocide. There's so much pain that exists, and yet there's still a lot of healing that I think we're going through in 2024. And I've seen in a lot of young people, I mean, how we try to adapt to this is being very unserious. I think if you go on social media right now, we're a very unserious generation. There are a lot of really heavy things happening to it, and how we react to that is people laugh, people try to find humor. So it's trying to find a balance now with this very big accessibility to knowledge, especially when it comes to, for example, like AI and all these things we talk about. But how do we now try to remember all these things that we're slowly forgetting? So going on the point again of theory or understanding your why, in our work in Tayo, we actually don't use Pinterest. That's our number one thing. No Pinterest, no pegs. We're not doing that because then you start just copying. And then you lose the whole essence of the idea of what makes someone a designer. It's we're able to imagine. We have to teach young people to dream again. I think this is like one of the biggest downfalls today, is a lot of people are now forgetting how to dream. They'll go on ChatGPT and type out something and use that. But even in our work, we don't use AI to do that because the human is capable of way more than that. And we have to stop submitting to all these introduction to very, very complex technologies that they'll say will save us, but in reality, it's up to us really to kind of counteract all these very, very destructive technologies that end up hurting our creativity in the end. So especially when a lot of people now talk about how it's so easy to be creative or to create, I mean, with AI nowadays. In 2024, there's a lot of now trying to reconnect to our spirituality. So how do we bring that back, that higher spirituality that a lot of our ancestors had, for them to be able to create now all these amazing traditional crafts that a lot of us just now see in museums. So how are we able to kind of reconnect to that creativity that our ancestors had, and how do we kind of connect back to that idea of being one with the earth rather than an existing species that goes against it? And the whole reason why the climate crisis exists is because it's a white man in the Western world creating all of this, like to put it blankly. So how do we as Filipinos now use our culture to our best to unpack all of these things that are forced upon us to be quote-unquote civilized? So what I think we've been doing in our work in 2024 is, well, one, we are now opening Balayatu. So in the back of Museo Pambata, there's an abandoned building that wasn't being used for many years. And Yatu, meaning both earth and memory in Kapampangan, our idea was to try to create a space where we can have archipelagical creation and tropical transformation and get young people and different generations together to talk about what makes us Filipino and how can we actually utilize that as being in this archipelago to our betterment or to our advantage. Because when you visit a lot of different places, we, for example, see like all these very, very oddly placed colonial structures, and when you ask them, what building is that? Oh, it's a municipality office. Oh, it's a government building. And it's so weird how our government buildings are the ones that actually counteract with their culture. Even when you visit, for example, NHA housing, we're not building communities. We're creating boxes for people to stay inside. So the whole goal now is to, again, unpack the idea of kapwa. How are you now becoming more aware about the other? How do we now talk about these values and introduce them to kids at a very early age, so when they become people in high power positions, they don't forget about these values that they've learned about growing up. And so through our organization Kids for Kids, it's one thing we really like introducing to young people. It's giving them the platform to be able to explore the world, to be able to dream, so that when they grow up, they don't forget this aspect. And acknowledging that there is a lot of different, there's a privilege you need to be able to acknowledge dreaming, or to be able to acknowledge foreseeing and hope. But when you look again even at everything that makes up our world, it all goes back to hope. To hoping that there's something better, there's something more. I read this article recently about even the makeup of our atoms. The only reason why they could actually connect with one another is because of hope. Like, everyone goes back to that idea of a higher being of hope. And I really hope that more people, especially when we're seeing now in 2024, kind of connect back to that, to resonate with that, and not be afraid to explore that side of spirituality, not being like unorganized religion, but spirituality really being able to connect to the unseen, to be able to dream and imagine. And what's so exciting is that so many people around the Philippines have this need. I visited 17 regions, one community per region, and every single community had this essence of kaluluwa or diva, or this inner spirit that connects all of them. And despite all the different realities that come their way, it's this spirit that really allows them to thrive. So how do we, living in a very concrete city, not allow that to disappear? And how do we continue championing that? And what's really exciting is, I just came back from London. I did an exhibit in the Museum of the Home, and we looked at different botanical specimens housed in Royal Botanical Gardens in this whole exhibit. And we opened the exhibition not with a formal ribbon cutting, but with a ritual. We brought in different people from the local artists to go to London, and when we did that opening ritual where we connected back to our spirituality, we were so surprised to see the museum full of people wanting to understand how do we actually end up channeling this deeper understanding of ecology, of creativity. And it was so surprising because at the beginning of the ritual, my friend Alaga, who was the one handling the whole opening ceremony, he said, okay, in order to really make this ritual, let's acknowledge the privileges we have. The first ones to come forward, I'd like to call the people in power. He's trying to think of other words, but he just goes, I'd like to call over all the white people and all the men to come. and be the first ones to kind of put down your offering. Because we need to be able now to even unpack things like the patriarchy. I mean, how do we bring back the bailan, like the power of Filipino spirituality? And how we can learn so much from the babaylan. We can learn so much from all these different things that the Western world has told us, oh, that's witchery, that's all these different terrible, scary things. But when you slowly unpack them, it starts to unearth actually all our innate connection to nature, and it doesn't anymore become separate from even corporate discussions, which is why when I'm in the rooms with a lot of different formal businessmen and people, how do you now unpack this very rigid, boxed up colonial mentality, and how do we bring back in our Filipino spirituality? Because it's definitely possible, and I handle a lot of my lolo's archives. So he was National Artist for Architecture, Bobby Manyosa, and now actually seeing what he's been talking about, this conversation has been happening for many, many generations. And I feel like now young people want to take on this conversation at a bigger scale, bring it to how instead of being on TikTok and understanding all these different Western trends, how do we bring our indigenous knowledge now to that scale? How do we understand that technology, instead of killing our spirituality, instead use it as a channel to make it progress? So I think that's one thing we've been trying to unpack in 2024. But I know there's a lot of things in one, but I hope that kind of helps facilitate.
So three things. Number one, the reason we don't know very much is that prehistory is not taught formally. I mean, it's little things in a big, it's a little module in the teaching, and because history supposedly started when the Spaniards came, which is of course wrong, but it's very difficult to teach prehistory. Slippery slope, you only have linguistics and archaeology, and number two, it's very dangerous to romanticize, what we had. You want to bring back headhunting is fine with me, you know. Up to the 1936, it sort of did determined peace among the Kalinga, among the Tingyan, but you know, there are such things. And maybe when somebody dies, you burn your house and move to another house, that sort of thing. So, of course, we learn about this and we try to learn the spirituality, the layer of consciousness behind the way we did certain things. But history is difficult to teach. It is very slippery slope. Number two, you kept saying colonial mentality, colonial. Think on the other side, the collaborators. It was not white people carrying on. In the Philippines during the Spanish time, at the most, there were 2,000 people, Castilla in Intramuros, and the rest were Pinoys. So,
That's grab mentality.
Grab mentality, whatever it is. But, you know, and I'm taking the stance of Fernando Sialcita. Not everything that the colonialists brought was bad. We learned a lot from them. It is the mentality, it is, well, collaboration, aspiration of the people who wanted to be
Interpretation na rin, di ba?
Doña Victorina, for instance, that mentality. But not everything they brought in, it was not just the colonialists that fought, the collaborators ng mga Pinoy, mga kamag-anak natin. You know? Really. And the third is, we kept saying, we have to learn how to dream again, dream again. Yeah, dream. But I think, what's that? 90% inspiration and, hard work, inspiration, that's what inspiration, dream and do. I think the do is very important. Thank you.
Quick wrap-ups from Alan.
Mine lang is like, you're talking about how to get like everybody on the same page. One of the things that I've been thinking about is pride of place. And when you say pride of place, it's not just like a physical space. It's also the history that comes around it. And in those areas that you see that they're elevated, it's the really pride of place. Like, I'm not gonna litter because I'm proud of this place and I don't want it dirty. That's happened like in Puerto Princesa. They became like the cleanest and greenest city. But that was a decision of everyone to do. Like the city government decided, okay, we're gonna be clean. We're gonna allot the funds to be able to keep things clean. But at the same time, what they did was they educated the citizens there. To the point that, but 4 or 5 years after that happened, I was in Baguio. I was already living in Puerto Princesa. We were in Baguio for a conference, and then suddenly I saw a trash can. And I was just like, oh, better throw the trash that's in my pocket. I go there, and this entire group from Puerto Princesa go there, and then we're all there taking stuff out of our pockets. And that really like, wow, kaya pala to. And that's the thing, is like we, as a community, should build on that pride to be able to move forward, diba? And that also includes complaining, complaining about that super steep ramp in the MRT, but also having people to support that claim. Like, not just being the lunatic complaining about all of this stuff, but at the same time having this community push for so that changes can be done and voices are heard.
I'm inspired a lot by what Natasha has been sharing, especially on the rediscovery and re-embracing of culture. So I'll share this in a bit of a personal way. My kids are third culture kids in the sense that they grew up for a long time outside the Philippines when they were traveling for my corporate world. My youngest son is 20 now, by the way. He's been the one most affected by a sense of cultural crisis and identity. But it's fascinating to see how he started to really discover himself in Baguio. He still considers himself as an outsider, but slowly appreciating the culture in very unique ways. So one of them, I was reminded of that story when you're talking about how we start the ritual, how we start the events, not with ribbon cutting, but with rituals. So I remember our first kanyang, the opening of Mount, not the opening, the anniversary of Mount God. bookstore, and it was the first kanyao that he witnessed, the slaughter of the pig and everything. And he was really just fascinated by that. And I remember also in last year's Baguio Creative City Festival, where another creative city from Europe was invited, and they had the kanyao, and the European visitors nearly fainted, just at the squealing of the pig being slaughtered with a wooden stake to the heart. It's very graphic, and it's done not in a very humane way, because that's the point. That's the suffering of the pig is the sacrifice. It's the spirit of the pig that goes on. Sorry, but to make a point to that. So that was his first culture shock, but also he leans into it. And his dream now is to one day become so accepted in the Baguio artist community, which he circulates in, and to be the one who slaughters the pig. because it's not anyone can do it.
Yes, it's an honor.
You have to be a very particular, respected member of the community to do that. He recently got a tattoo, 3 years ago, he got a tattoo, not from Mongol, but from the base of Mongol. So he has it, it's a centipede around his wrist. And he's very proud of it, but one of his most design, he's very proud of the design because he had asked for it. And then one day while walking, with the artist community, one of the artists there was very drunk at that time. I don't say what it is. Where did you get that? The tattoo. Then we talked about it, and you know what it means. He says, yes. Did you earn it? He said, oh. then he said, okay, not yet, but I plan to. So I think that's, for me, the inspiration that you're sharing, how the youth are leaning into our culture and identity, and I'm inspired by that.
Can I just follow that? But
Quick lang po, Miss Gab.
very good. Now, how do we spread that out to other people? He has exposure. He has you. He has the creative city. How do we spread that to kids in San Nicolas? Places where they have no inspiration like you, and if we want to spread that, is that for education? I'm asking. I don't know. Maybe on TikTok, maybe a way, because I remember Amido Papa said, I'm going to spread history by TikToking. Maybe colleges or the NCCA can do that, because that is for me wonderful.
So perhaps we can close this super beautiful discussion. Maybe we can take that as like a challenge maybe for 2025. How do we broaden the possibilities, broaden the questions, reconnect with meaning and theory, reconnect with our healing, and reconnect with our spirituality, welcome it in our life, so that maybe we can all have some pride in where we live, whether it's Metro Manila or wherever, so that we can love who we are and our islandness, and hopefully it may be manifested in how we design. So thank you so much to our panel. That was the Philippine Design.